Has there been any wrestling news out there in the last week or so recently? I can't think.
No, I think it's been pretty quiet, hasn't it? it
I saw on the YouTube channel, 83 Weeks, that you've done an entire episode on Vince returning and Stephanie leaving, and potentially at this point Saudi Arabia buying, or the Crown Prince and the fund buying WWE. What's sort of your bottom line on what you make of this entire situation? That's basically a real life entourage now.
yeah, it's a fascinating time in professional wrestling, for sure in professional wrestling, but I think even in media as a whole. Here in this country, at least, we call it vertical integration, and what that basically means is bigger companies buying up smaller companies, and before you know it, there's only two or three companies left.
Hmm.
Instead of having all these independent production companies and independent, cable outlets and networks and such, it all kind of gets gobbled up and aggregated under one brand. And I think that's sad, much like we were talking about with the destruction of old buildings with history and class and character of their own. When you have this vertical integration that's fueled by mergers and acquisitions, a lot of the independent television producers, a lot of the independent television networks, um, they lose their soul and they become one big corporate entity. And it manifests with less variety, less character. I find the end result can be very, very boring and sanitized. So I'm sorry. In many ways, I'm sad to see WWE being sold to a bigger conglomerate, whether it be NBC or Comcast USA here, or the Fox, empire, because I love the independent nature of what WWE has been for so long. It's been a family business. It's a public company, but it's still run by one guy, and I'm going to miss that. But there's so much speculation going on. The Saudi thing, I was convinced as late as Monday night, before I went to bed, because of the people that I was hearing from that have credibility, that it was a done deal. And I was very disappointed to hear that, because I think, take the politics of all of it, and I put that aside because it's a separate issue. But I felt like we're losing something. We're losing a part of something that is so uniquely American. And I was grateful and relieved to hear that doesn't look like it's, at least right now, like it's really the Saudis that are in a position to close the deal anytime soon. So hopefully, it'll go somewhere else, but we'll see. Time will tell.
What do you think? You worked with Vince closely at 2019, if at no other time. What do you think Vince's end game here is? Because he's got more money than he could ever spend in his life already. He's already 77 years old, and apparently he's very bored staying at home. So what's the end game for Vince? Does he just want power? Does he really want to sell? What do you think?
James, if I knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I would be sitting with a stockbroker and planning my investment strategies. That's the wild card in this thing, James, because, and I've said this a lot in other interviews, I competed against Vince McMahon for a long time. And you get to know somebody, or you get a perception of someone when you're actually in the trenches fighting against them. And then I went to work for Vince McMahon back in the early 2000s, but as a talent. Now, as a talent, I would talk to Vince, or in some cases when we would have scenes together on television, obviously I'm working with Vince and things like that. And I got to know Vince a little bit during that period of time. And then when I worked for back in 2019, when I was an executive working underneath Vince, and I reported directly to Vince, he was my direct boss. And I probably spent a total of 20 hours a week, maybe 25 hours a week with Vince, either one-on-one or most often in a very small group of people. Paul Heyman, for example, Bruce Pritchard. And I got a little bit of insight into what makes Vince tick. But I have to say, he is one of the most complex and fascinating people I've ever worked with or against. And I don't know what his motivation is. That's the key to this whole thing. You know, there's two schools of thought, right? One school of thought suggests to me that just take Vince McMahon at face value. You take his press release at face value. He's coming back to maximize the media rights opportunity or maximize the facilitation of a sale. Now, if you take that at face value, it suggests to me, having known Vince a little bit, that Vince has decided this is his company. He built it from the ground up. Well, not from the ground up. He actually, bought it from his father. But the WWE that we know today is essentially a company that's been built from the ground up. And he wants to write the last chapter of his story. And he wants to be the one to put the period at the end of the last sentence in his legacy as a guy who came in and made one of the biggest media deals in history. That's one school of thought. There's another school of thought that suggests that all of this is about Vince gaining a little bit of revenge, because let's face it, it was a palace coup of sorts that forced him out. We don't know the details of that. I think a lot of that is going to be revealed in the weeks and months to come. There is a lot more to the story of Vince McMahon resigning than we currently know. I've heard the rumors. I know what the chatter is. I wouldn't dare repeat them because I don't know if it's true or not, and I don't do that. But regardless, Vince was forced out the door. That is antithetical to Vince McMahon's genetic makeup. He will fight. And that school of thought would suggest that Vince McMahon forced his way back to the board and is going to do what he needs to do, which includes probably selling the company, but ultimately with him in charge of that new entity, right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know which is true. I don't know what his motivation is. No, I don't think anybody does, by the way, other than Vince McMahon.